Geeks, geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic book fans the world over, Ask Chuck Dixon is back with a new episode this week to make your Wednesday morning more comicful. Oh, anyway, let's just ignore me and jump to the first question. Hassan Pashal, you mentioned that stories shouldn't be about the characters. Can you please elaborate? That's a common theme with me. and I guess I've never fully explained it. So let me attempt to dive into that right now. We're familiar with the fact that most superhero movies, or an awful lot of superhero movies, certainly too many superhero movies, retell the origin of the character over and over and over again. And this mistake of constantly reminding the audience of where the characters came from, even though everyone in the audience already knows the story, it's a major flaw, and it's becoming a major flaw even outside the superhero genre. Being concerned about where a character came from, his origins, character-driven fiction is basically what I'm going for here. And the thing is, there's this like gravitational, irresistible pull to some writers to, rather than write a story, write a fictional biography of the character that they're dealing with, to include, everyday mundane events and, Freudian glimpses into their background to explain their motivations and everything else. And all of this takes you away from story. All of this avoids the heavy lifting of writing plot. The best recent example I can think of is the de-evolution of the James Bond character. James Bond was always pretty much a cipher. All we knew about him really was that he was real good at killing people. He smoked too much, he drank too much, and he was pretty indiscriminate about the women that he hung around with. And that's really all we needed to know, because James Bond, 007, is the ultimate male wish fulfillment figure. He goes through life not giving a damn about anybody but himself and his own desires and wants. Luckily for all of us, he's on the side of the angels. Otherwise, he'd be the biggest bad guy in cinema history, because James Bond is at heart a prick. He's not a guy you'd want to hang out with. And that's all we needed to know about him. If you watch a later James Bond movie and you knew nothing about the James Bond movies, you'd probably be confused as hell, because there's no background on this character. There's no explanation about quite why he's doing what he's doing. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the story. What matters in a James Bond film is the villain's plot to either take over the world, or take over a big portion of the world, or annihilate the human race, or start a war that will benefit them personally. The villains in the James Bond story and the plot that they have to see their goals realized, that's the germ of a James Bond movie. And James Bond is simply a character set in motion that we cheer for, and he's going to bring this bad guy down. Think about it. Even if you're a dyed-in-the-wool Bond fan, your favorite Bond stories are the ones with the best villains and the best, most clever plots, like Goldfinger. Goldfinger's a work of genius. As far as, it's like the anti-heist film. Goldfinger breaks into Fort Knox, and he doesn't mean to steal anything. It's awesome. It's such a great idea. I still stand in all of it. Contrast that with what's happened to Bond in like the last 3 movies. They've delved into his origin, his motivations, his past. They've turned him into a weepy worker drone. Where there used to be snappy repartee between Bond and his superiors, you got the idea that Bond was a little bit of an anti-authoritarian because he was always breaking the rules. Now you've got his superiors basically openly insulting him as if he's just some sort of a thug, and he has to take it. And then we get into his family past and all these other things that we never thought about or were interested in ever before. Consequently, the story suffers. The plots get murky because they're not concentrating on plot anymore, because the movie is about James Bond. It's not a good story with James Bond in it. And what happened? The audience went away. You know, as the previous 3 films played out, and Skyfall's a good Bond movie, even though it delves into areas I wish it hadn't. But after Skyfall, we're in the danger zone. And the box office for the following 2 films just fell off a cliff. They've got to reboot Bond, bring him back to his roots, or this franchise is over. And I know everybody's, you know, I've heard this a million times in my lifetime. No, the Bond franchise is over. It's never coming back. It'll come back if these people wise up. And of course, that's true for so many franchises. But think about a character like Captain Ahab, classic character. Moby Dick is not about Captain Ahab. Captain Ahab is set up as a character. He's set up, and we know a lot about Captain Ahab, as well as compelling mysteries about Captain Ahab, long before we meet Captain Ahab. Captain Ahab's entrance in the novel Moby Dick is unforgettable. But by the time he's arrived, we've heard all of this stuff about him, rumor and surmising and guesses, but we know his story. His leg was taken by a great white whale, and he's dedicated to tracking that whale down. And then, so we've set Ahab in motion even before we've met him. Then we meet him. The rest of the story is not about Captain Ahab. It's about hunting that frickin' whale. And all the danger to all of these crew members. We were introduced to all of these indelible characters who are the crew members of the Pequod. And we worry about them. And we're concerned about them. Moby Dick is the first great action story ever written. The action is amazing in the book. There's chapters you should skip because Melville thought you needed to know a whole lot more about whales than you really needed to know to enjoy the story. But even so, it's a great action story, but yes, Ahab's in it. He's essential to the story, but it's not all about Ahab. And that's probably the best example I can think of. So I hope you understand now the difference between having a character-driven story, a story about a character, and a story with the character in it. This is why I lament I don't like any of the Batman films, any of them, because they're all about Batman, not Batman in a good story. So you can't forget about plot. Plot's important. Lazy writers will say, no, character is more important. That's because they're lazy. John Bua, what are your feelings on Will Eisner? I am in awe of the man's work. Well, Will Eisner, creator of The Spirit and many other Golden Age characters, justifiably a giant in comics business. He took the medium seriously at a time when a lot of people weren't. But remember, he started out in the newspapers, and generally in newspapers the comics medium was taken more seriously. Strips like Terry and the Pirates and Little Orphan Annie dealt with very serious subject matter. Their creators obviously were very earnest in their work. Because Eisner graduates into the comic book realm, because Spirit books were, the Spirit was presented as a comic book, not a comic strip, in the newspapers. Every Sunday there would be this supplement in some newspapers, and the supplement was Spirit with some backup stories, all packaged by the Will Eisner studio. So Eisner's really the first guy, along with Karl Barks, to explore this new medium of comic books in a grown-up adult approach. approach. They realized their audience was still mostly kids, but they were taking this medium and reinventing it and morphing it and changing it into the comics that we know today, presenting, dramatic stories meant to be enjoyed by a broad audience of kids and adults, with richly realized characters, a real continuity, and an emotional depth to the stories that had not previously been apparent in comics. Because let's face it, in the heyday of the Spirit and Carl Barks, the two go along together. These are part of the foundation of the comics that we read today. At this time, the writing was being done by newspaper men who were down on their luck, failed novelists, writers who were either starting out or were at the end of their career with nowhere else to go but write for comics. And so the work is generally indifferent. And so much of the artwork is done by young guys who were, fans of the comic genre, who dreamed someday of having their own comic strip, but they were willing to work in the ghetto of comics. And, so the golden age is really majority of it is extremely amateurish. Not good stuff. Nobody's thinking about the medium at all. They're just thinking about a paycheck, or they're driven by dreams of one day being in the strips, which is where the money was. Eisner's approach, and Karl Barks as well, were not that. They took this new medium seriously and brought in elements of, fiction from novels, began thinking, cinemagraphically about comic book storytelling, these were the earliest creators who appreciated that this was a visually driven medium, and you could entertain the reader with the visuals married to the words. There's very little wasted verbiage in a Will Eisner Spirit story. A lot of times he would have silent panels and silent pages, no words, no captions, allowing the visuals to carry the story entirely. This was a big step in the evolution of comics, and it was Eisner and his artists, Lou Fine, Jack Cole. We can't forget one of his main writers, Jules Pfeiffer, who brought a lot to this. But like I said, the Spirit had an emotional depth that was present in the comic strips, but absent from comic books. And you have to think that the comic book creators at the time were looking pretty hard at Will Eisner. Also, Will Eisner did comic books as well. His studio, the Eisner-Iger studio, was a factory for comic book material. So his influence is, it's hard to overemphasize. It's pretty much incalculable. John Bua Twin Spin. All right. Since I am thinking of old timers, I might as well ask if you're a fan of Jack Cole. I have yet to read his Plastic Man. I am only familiar with the character from other creators. I really can't stand him. I'm not sure how Plastic Man is portrayed at DC these days. I imagine it's not a patch on the way he appeared in the Golden Age and into the 50s. You really owe it to yourself to check out Jack Cole's Plastic Man. It's an absolute work of genius. Remember, I said before that most Golden Age comics were indifferently produced by amateurs. Plastic Man is a standout. It is a standout. The stories are still funny, still clever. This guy churned through ideas like nobody's business. He very rarely ever repeated himself. The gags, the morphing and transformation gags of Plastic Man are endlessly inventive, endlessly clever. He didn't stand on formula very much. They're just well-constructed, well-crafted stories that would have played great as crime action stories straight up. but Koepp makes them humorous as well. He understood what all humorists understand is that you need a story first before you bring the funny. And he always had a good story. Always terrific villains. And he never reused villains as far as I'm aware. I've read a lot of Plastic Man, and every story features a brand new bad guy. And in each case, there's something to behold. And Jack Koepp worked on other things. There was a there was a strip, I can't remember the name now, but it was about a bunch of basically suicidal World War II pilots. Death Patrol, that was what it was. And of course, he worked with Eisner on the primarily on the daily spirit strips when Eisner went into the army during World War II. During World War II. So let's move on to Warren Bennett. You were a writer on many comics I read as a teen and young man, including The Punisher and Batman. And now you have a lot of work through your own company, through the Rippaverse, through Arctoons and others. Do you find writing in comics feel more enjoyable now or during the time period when you were on those iconic titles? I know the landscape has changed, so I'm just curious, what is better for you as a writer? Well, getting to work with the iconic characters, that's a lot of fun, and that's cool. And back in the day, the money was good, and my editors had faith in me. So it was a golden age for me. I was earning well. I was kind of the go-to guy on the Batman titles for a while, which, man, that's the catbird seat in comics. When you're the go-to guy on the Batman titles, there's just nothing better. So I was there for over a decade, and it was a great time. But, it's not everything. Everything has to come to an end. I couldn't write Batman for the rest of my life. Nobody ever gets to write a comic book for the rest of their life. These days, you're lucky if you get to write 3 issues in a row before you're either canceled or replaced. But no, it was a great time. But I'm still as enthusiastic today for, stuff I've created. And of course, I get to work with my buddy Graham on things like Joe Frankenstein. And that's every bit as much fun. Because Graham's got a bit of a machine going over there at Compass Comics. So there's no difference between that and working at DC. I mean, the money's right. And, obviously as co-creators, he has faith in me. And so I have the same sort of enjoyment and fun sitting down to write stuff that, he and I made up. And then, I'm still doing, licensed stuff like the Rambo graphic novel, which is soon to be released from Splatto Comics. And here again, I've got Richard Meyer at Splatto, your boy Zach. He's got all the faith in the world in me. And I'm working with Sylvester Stallone, who surprisingly has all the faith in the world with me, in me, and, allowed me to take this, iconic character that he's been associated with for so long and, put him through his paces. And then you mentioned Eric July and Rippaverse. Again, another situation where there's really no difference between working for Eric and working for DC and Marvel back in the day. And certainly much better than working for DC or Marvel today. And again, there's that element of faith and trust that Eric has in me. He's allowed me to enter his sandbox of the Rippaverse and play with some of his characters, create new characters, new situations, help him world build, and that's all a lot of fun. I'm having fun doing that stuff. I mean, I had fun doing that stuff on Batman. Batman had been around for decades and decades, but there was still world building to be done. There were still streets to be named and bridges to be named. It's trying to bring some level of continuity to Gotham City and the Batcave and things like that. Figuring out the logistics of how that world works. I mean, that stuff all fascinates me. And it fascinates me in any universe I happen to be dropped into. And, I like creating my own stuff on my own as well. I've had a surprisingly successful career as a second career as a novelist, which I never anticipated. I've always been a comic book guy. I never had dreams of being a novelist or a screenwriter or anything else. I wanted to write comics to the day I died. But economics a few years ago forced me to into the prose writing gig, and I've enjoyed it, and I've had some success with it. And again, it's world building, And but this time I had to have faith in myself because I started out as a self-publisher. But I did well as long as the ebook gold rush was on. It's over now, so I had to go to another publisher. But my new publisher, Wolfpack, through the Rough Edges imprint, they believe in me as well. So that's really what it's all about. Working for people who trust you, whether you're working with characters they own or creating new stuff that they're going to publish and distribute. Joshua Ignatowski. Do you think Clark Kent takes advantage of the fact that he can't put on weight and eats a higher number of fatty foods than the average American? I mean, how cool would that be? Just eat whatever you want. I got to imagine that his caloric intake must be enormous. This guy's got to, sit down to 3 squares a day and probably a snack before bedtime to keep that metabolism going. Again, it can't all be the yellow sun that powers him because, he's close enough to a human. He's got to be burning calories as he saves school buses full of children and races the Flash around the world. So I would assume, hopefully nothing ever happens to his metabolism, eating fatty American food. But that's one of the cool, imponderables that makes Superman so fascinating. It all comes down to the question, could God create a rock so heavy he couldn't lift it? And then those are the kind of riddles and questions that we have about a near godlike figure like Superman. And of course, it's been the source of Superman stories for decades. I don't know if they do that kind of story anymore, explaining the logistics of Superman, how that works. But those were always my favorites as a kid. Where, how's he do this? How's he cut his hair? How did Ma Kent sew the costume? Since it's impervious to bullets. Things like that there. So, good question. It's an Ignatowski twin spin. Here we go. I think, if I recall correctly, you said that when you wrote Batman stories with the Riddler in, and man, we get a lot of Riddler questions, that you came up with about half the riddles yourself. How in the world did you write so many riddles, let alone ones that had 2 plausible answers? Are you secretly superhuman or what? I was just willing to put the work in. Like I said, I had a shelf full of riddle books. Usually they're written for kids. So I had all these riddle books, and I yellow highlighting and folding pages over and everything else. But of all the riddle books I had, they didn't all suit what I was doing. And so I had to come up with riddles. And my longest Riddler story done in Detective Comics with Graham Nolan was involved a baseball theme. So I had to come up with not only riddles, but riddles that were themed around baseball. And not because I'm a baseball fan or anything. I'm not really a baseball fan. I just thought it would be, I like the imagery. I knew Graham was a big baseball fan, big Yankees fan. I knew he'd have fun drawing that story. And I had read a book on baseball scoring. Why, if I'm not interested in baseball, did I read a book on baseball scoring? I don't know. But it fascinated me. The idea that baseball is like the only game that comes with a scorecard, and fans would fill them out and collect them, and just the mathematics behind it all, the symbology, just seemed ripe for a Riddler story. So yeah, I just had to do the heavy lifting of figuring it out. Now, as an adjunct to your question, in my search for riddle books, I came across this awesome book of Irish riddles, and there were Irish riddles from the 1700s. And I thought about, I pitched a story, and it was a Batman pirate story that would be drawn by Alcatena. And in which Captain Leatherwing, our pirate Batman, returns to England with the wicked Felina, Catwoman, and they return to England to be formally married. And we find out that Captain Leatherwing is actually a titled English lord. And we enter into this kind of Henry Fielding kind of story, in which he runs up against Poison Ivy, who's this crazy baroness with an enormous greenhouse full of man-eating plants, and Lord Conundrum, who is the Riddler. And Lord Conundrum is an Irish lord, and I had all these riddles ready for Lord Conundrum's crimes. But and my pitch was, let us do like just another, 40, 50 page Batman pirate story, and you'll have enough for a trade paperback between Detective Manual 7 and the 10-page Penguin pirate story that I did for Batman Chronicles. I said, we'll have enough for a pirate trade paperback, because Pirate Batman was enormously popular. Pirate Batman launched his own line of toys at Kenner. I mean, there was like 5 Pirate Batman toys based on the work that Kike and I had done on Detective Annual 7. And so obviously there was an audience for it, but DC poo-pooed that idea. But I just thought you'd enjoy knowing that I did have another Riddler story I wanted to do, but I got shot down, my friends. Oh, it's an Ignatowski triple spin. He's back for more. A third scoop. Back when you lived in Pennsylvania, what would you say were some of the biggest differences between Pennsylvania culture and New York culture? Well, I can illustrate that pretty easily in the difference between Philly and New York police departments. Philly cops probably have, except for maybe Houston, the worst reputation for a police department in America. They're mean, they're tough, they don't take any crap from anybody, and they're the only police department that dropped a bomb on their own city back in the early 80s. Look it up. And they generally just don't, take any guff from anybody. Most recent example I can think of was during the many riots, Antifa and BLM riots in the summer of 2020. The only city where you saw the nightsticks come out and the rubber bullets come out was Philly. It looked like something from a Gladiator movie in front of City Hall a number of times. The first few nights of the big riots in Philly, because Philly never had riots, primarily because their cops are so mean. Philly never experienced riots in the 60s, mainly because Frank Rizzo, who was mayor at the time, had formerly been chief of police and a tough guy. He borrowed tanks from the National Guard and parked them on every corner where he thought trouble might start, and consequently trouble never started. So I've had experiences with cops. I've never been arrested. I was never a criminal and everything else, but just day to day on the street experience with Philly cops, and generally found them to be rude and intolerant, and basically just get out of here, kid. That kind of cop. Now, New York cops, they certainly have a reputation for toughness. The first time I visited New York on my own, I'm wandering the streets. I'm lost. I couldn't, New York's like the hardest city in the world to get lost in, but I still managed to get lost in Manhattan. The only person I could ask directions from was a cop standing on the corner. And I was hesitant because I knew how that would play out in Philly. I wouldn't get directions. I would get told to do something impossible to myself just for annoying him. And so I'd go up to this cop and say, look, I'm looking for this hotel, and he was friendly. It blew me away. I thought, is this an actor pretending to be a cop? He was friendly, and he offered me cogent directions to the hotel and wished me a good day. And generally, that was my experience in New York overall. Everybody was nice. Now, New Yorkers have an acerbic sense of humor, but it's not a mean sense of humor. And generally, the cops are sort of an example, but that's the basic mood of both cities. Philadelphia is a tough town. It's got a chip on its shoulder. It's a hard scrabble. I hate that phrase, but that's what it is. More blue collar city. It's why so many boxers come from Philadelphia. They got something to prove. New York, generally, New Yorkers are extraordinarily friendly. The only people I can think of that are more friendly are Londoners. Londoners are almost insanely friendly. in my experience. Now let's go out across the rest of Pennsylvania and see, does this rudeness based in Philly spread? Yes, it does. I lived in Lancaster County, Lancaster, famously an Amish community, for a number of years. Now the Amish were awesome, always friendly, always informative, always really interesting people to talk to. Didn't never talk to the women. The women don't talk to the English. That's you and me, people who aren't Amish, but the men do. And I found that they always have questions about the outside world. They don't live in the outside world, but they're very curious about it. They want to know, why is this and why is that? And every Amish person, every Amish guy I ever met he was fun to talk to, friendly, not standoffish, the way you would think, the way that the Amish are often portrayed. They are not of the world, but they know they're part of the world. But your fallen Amish, your Mennonites and people that walked away from that way of life, who populate Lancaster, possibly some of the rudest people I've ever met anywhere. Lancaster has such a reputation for rudeness that once a year, the Sunday newspaper would have an article, "Why does everyone think we're so rude?" so at least they were aware of it. They never did anything about it, but they were aware of it. It was not unusual. In fact, it was like 90% of the time, if you walked into a store, you wouldn't be greeted with, "May I help you?" You would be greeted with, "What do you want?" And this strangeness, this odd behavior, extends further out. I lived in Berks County for a while, which is outside of Reading, Pennsylvania. Reading, Pennsylvania, the town that was turned into a ghost town on purpose. Reading was once a big railway hub. There was a direct train line from Reading to Philadelphia that for some reason they shut down. And when they shut down the train line, the city died. And Reading has even more of a chip on its shoulder than Philadelphia. And you never get in an argument with someone from Reading because you're simply never going to the street arguing with you. And then there's there's Scranton. We move a little further north to Scranton. This picture is on Main Street in Scranton. Give you any indication of what Scranton's like. I apologize to anybody who lives in these towns, but you know who you are, and you know your areas have reputations. Scranton has a reputation for rudeness and weirdness, and all extraordinary number of mass murderers and serial killers are either from Scranton or were apprehended in Scranton because they chose to hide there. I guess protective cover. They wouldn't be noticed like they would in any normal community. And of course, there are any number of famous criminals who call Scranton their hometown. Okay, Michael Boberg. There's a lot of internet chatter about Disney's financial troubles, and the rumor is they'll be selling some IPs. If CrossGen gets purchased by somebody or some group of competent people, would you write for them again? What would that look like? Would you ever consider being part of a group to purchase a CrossGen? If you mean like spend money to join an investment group, no. There's one thing I've learned being in the entertainment business is you never spend your own money. You spend other people's money. But if somebody put CrossGen back together again and was paying competitive rates and offered some degree of participation, especially if they followed the participation plan that Mark Alessi laid down for the company, I'd go back in a heartbeat. If only to complete some of the runs they did. I would love to write the next arc of Way of the Rat, which, if you're familiar with Way of the Rat, remember the Khan character, who was the big bad villain in the first arc. He was literally consigned to hell at the end of his story. And the planned final arc or concluding arc of Way of the Rat was going to be he returns from hell, but he's now been sort of recreated as a cross between a hybrid of a human and a dragon. And then he calls himself Dragon Khan. And he would, return to plague Boone and Popo and, big action like this series always featured. Dragon Khan, I remember Jeff Johnson even did drawings of what Dragon Khan would look like. I'd like to see the conclusion of Brath. We kind of left everybody on a cliffhanger there. Left everybody in the middle of nowhere, so that the material is kind of worthless because it has no conclusion. Same thing for Alcazador. I had a second Alcazador arc planned, another 6-issue arc. If you've read the series, you know that the final issue, issue 6, ends with Lady Sin asking a question that obviously leads to another story involving needing participants who can speak Latin. So I had a whole thing planned there. So yeah, I would come back and write the conclusions of these things. I really don't see that happening. If some investment group gets together to purchase CrossGen, they probably have their own ideas of what they want to do, and they really don't want to hear from any of the former creators, which is sad, very sad. But hopefully that'll happen, and we'll, because I hate to see any kind of intellectual property die forever, and I think Disney has pretty much forgotten they even owned this stuff. They really dropped the ball on this, and they dropped the ball on Abatazad, which was a series of chapter books we had done that really sold well in the market, and Hyperion, the Disney publisher, simply just didn't continue them. But I remember seeing them on end caps at Target and seeing that they were selling. Because they were at my local Target, and each time I went by, there were less and less and less of them. And my understanding was it sold quite well, but Disney wasn't interested and didn't continue it. So why they buy this stuff to kill it, I don't understand. But, you see it everywhere, particularly Disney. They seem to buy things just to strangle them or eliminate them or make the world forget about them for whatever reason. David Jordan. I was just reading the interview you did with the Shift website, and you mentioned you had an idea to clear up Moon Knight's origin, but the editor wasn't interested. What was the plan? I've discussed this in videos before, but I understand everybody doesn't watch every video. And, it's like, well, we don't mind if you tell that story again. So I'll tell that story again. I was always bothered by the fact that Mark Spector, he's one of the only comic book characters in American comics who is Jewish, and it always bothered me that he got his powers from an Egyptian pharaoh. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, being that obviously the pharaohs and the Hebrews were not the best of friends. So how would this have happened? And so I proposed to the editor. I said, there was a time when in the time before Moses, that the Hebrews were the pharaohs, that the Hebrews had raided down into Egypt. Initially, the Hebrews came out of Central Eurasia, raided down the Middle East. They were very much like the Mongols in their time period, and they got on down there to Egypt, and Egypt was in a bad way as a society. They were crumbling, and the Hebrew tribes took over Egypt and promoted themselves and made themselves the pharaohs, the viziers, and the rest. This is the time of Joseph. And I thought, well, what if Khonshu wasn't an Egyptian? What if he was a Hebrew priest, a Pharisee? And wouldn't that clean everything up real nice? And wouldn't it make for an interesting retelling of the origin? It's the same origin. We're just putting a different cast on it. And my editor, who is Jewish, said he hated that idea. That they didn't want to bring out Mark Spector's Jewishness, which I thought was, okay, what? Do you think you're losing sales over that? Didn't make any sense to me at all. But there you have it. So yeah, I wanted Khonshu to be a Hebrew priest of the old school, and once again I got shut down. But if you're in comics, you get shot down all the time. You get shot down more than Lee Marvin. Chuck Johnson, by all criteria, or I should say Sean Bean. Chuck Johnson, by all criteria, you truly are a comic book legend. Just your name in a book will increase sales, because your readers know that you're just not going to phone it in. With that in mind, you always come across as a down-to-earth, friendly guy who appreciates both the fans and the medium and willingly interacts with the fans. There are individuals in the industry with only a fraction of your accolades who seem to have their heads in the clouds or rear orifice and come across as arrogant and aloof when it comes to fans and the industry. How do you stay grounded with your achievements with so many folks telling you how great you are? The simple answer to this is I'm married. And my wife has no interest. She's not a comic fan, never was. Certainly interested in my career, but not really, doesn't really follow this stuff and really doesn't care about it. And she keeps me grounded. And she's also my muse. She's awesome at story structure and high concept stuff. And I often bounce stories off of her, although she has no interest in contributing to the comics other than the times where she came up with plot lines for my Simpsons stories, which I got her credited for, and a few of the SpongeBob stories, which I was unable to get her credited for. But so that's part of it. You got to have somebody in your life that keeps you humble. Much like Caesar, you need somebody behind you saying, sic transit gloria, all glory is fleeting. And I've never been a terribly ego-driven person anyway. I feel I'm blessed to be doing what I love. And trust me, I'm just a big fanboy, just like most of you are. And I love this medium the same way that you love it. So I've never been too cool for school about what I've been doing, the jaded, too sophisticated writer who's, yes, I'm writing comics now, but it's only a stepping stone to my real career as a poet. I've never had any pretensions about anything. I've just wanted to be a comic book writer, and I'm lucky to be that. And you folks helped me do that. So why wouldn't I want to talk with you and interact with you and share my knowledge and all the rest of it, no matter how great I am. It's a God-given talent. Comics are in my DNA. What can I say? The comics are a second language to me. And writing comics comes easily and naturally to me. I mean, I understand the medium backwards and forwards. And it's just a good thing I got to work in it. Otherwise, I just would have been, the unhappiest ice cream truck driver or 7-Eleven counterman you've ever met in your life. But luckily, I escaped all that and never had to work a day in my life again. So I'm introducing a new feature here called Pet Peeves. These are little things that bother me that I'm going to bother you with them now. Wordplay versus puns. You're like, Chuck, what the hell are you talking about? I see this all the time. People will go, oh, pardon my pun, right? And they all chuckle. Okay, except what you just said wasn't a pun. It was wordplay. It was a play on words, but it wasn't a pun. And I don't think people understand. Here's an example of a pun. Did you hear about the fire at the circus? The heat was intense. That's a pun. That's taking, I think they call it a homophonic homophonic pun, because intense sounds like intense. Therefore lies the joke. And as someone said, puns are the lowest form of humor, although I like a good pun. Now, wordplay is a different thing. Which sandwich should I order? That's quite a pickle. That's not a pun. That's just using a word that related to the previous phrase in a different way than it was meant to be used. It's like a synonym, right? It's not even a synonym. It's just a substitution. It's not a pun. Okay? He literally means pickle. The pickle has two meanings. So that's wordplay. Okay? So we have all this straight. Now I straighten that out. I'll never hear that again, will I? Oh, pardon me for the pun. Oh, so now you know, and you can lecture everybody else. You can get everybody else's face about it next time you hear, Uncle Bob at the dinner table say, "Oh, pardon my pun." Uncle Bob, that wasn't a pun. You're full of crap. Okay, brunobookstore@gmail.com. If you want to reach me, it's the most direct way. All of these questions today came off of the email address because I check it all the time. You can ask questions below the video. You can ask questions on Twitter and Facebook and all the rest, but I might miss them. I'm never going to miss your question here. And if you put a question here and I don't answer it, it means either I don't have an answer or I don't have an opinion about that particular subject. I'm not being rude. I can't just put questions up here and go, I don't know. That's not really the purpose of Ask Chuck Dixon. I could call it Chuck Dixon Doesn't Know. Maybe I'll do a whole segment of Chuck Dixon Doesn't Know. No, just question after question. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know anything about that. Never heard of that. Okay, while I have you, First Kill graphic novel is still up in demand. It's going to be up in demand through the summer, so it's not like a call before midnight tonight. I'm not trying to rush you. I'm just trying to remind any of you who either never heard of First Kill that it's out there, or maybe you knew about it, but you forget you meant to order it, but you didn't. You can still order it. I'll have the link below the video. First Kill graphic novel is Rambo's first tour of duty in Vietnam, which I mentioned earlier in the video. And it's a slam bang war story set in Indochina just before the Tet Offensive. And if you like a good old fashioned shoot 'em up war story, this is the one for you. So that's it for this week. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for liking and subscribing and all the other amazing things you folks do. And of course, thanks for the incredible questions that make this channel possible.